I'm Jennifer Waugh with episode 2 of our News for Jax crime series, Florida Justice Betraying the Badge. In 1999, a team of federal investigators uncovers a secret while listening to a wiretap conversation of a notorious drug dealer. A police officer with the Jacksonville Sheriff's Office was leaking information about drug investigations. No one wanted to believe that Officer Eric Sinclair was dirty until the accusation leads to a witness who reveals a web of deceit and corruption so deep it triggers a 3-year investigation, the likes of which had never been seen within the history of the Jacksonville Sheriff's Office. Daryl Crowden may list shoe repair as his occupation in 1999, but on the street, his nickname is 8-Ball, drug lingo for an eighth of cocaine. His arrest history dates back a decade earlier, pointing to a reputation as a low-level drug dealer. Deep in the stack of his arrest reports is where we find his connection to Officer Eric Sinclair. A traffic stop on April 1, 1997, when Sinclair pulls over Crowden for an outstanding felony arrest warrant for narcotics. A search uncovers marijuana in Crowden's pocket. But nowhere in this handwritten report does Officer Sinclair ever document the cocaine he also discovered that night. Sinclair let Crowden off, knowing he'd owe him, a debt that would soon come back to haunt 8-Ball. 2 years later, September 1999, these drug dealers revealed Daryl Crowden is the middleman between them and Officer Sinclair, who they were paying for information about drug investigations.
Anything in reference to Officer Sinclair at this particular time, subject to grand jury inquiry, and I can't comment on it.
It gave Jacksonville Sheriff Nat Glover enough reason to pull Sinclair from the narcotics unit and assign him to desk duty. But prosecutor Jim Clint hopes Daryl Crowden can provide enough detail to prove the allegations in court. They just need him to cooperate. Detective Richard True was working with Clint as part of a federal drug task force and remembers something odd that happened when he picked up Crowden for an interview.
As I was starting to drive out the driveway, he wanted me to stop. He had to go get something out of the house. He had something that he wanted to give Jim Clint when we got there.
You think that was odd?
Yeah. So we let him go back in the house. He really couldn't go nowhere. I mean, and we didn't have him under arrest. So he comes back out, gets in the car. We take him to Jim's office, and he presents this affidavit to Jim.
Crowden somehow knew what Clint wanted to discuss. He had this sworn affidavit typed and notarized, ready to present to the federal prosecutor.
That basically stated that he, Crowden, knew that Eric Sinclair was a good cop, had never committed any crimes, and that he, Daryl Crowden, hadn't been involved with Sinclair in any criminal activity.
What did you think?
Well, I thought that Sinclair was getting ahead of the game by talking Crowden into providing this false affidavit and trying to obviously obstruct the investigation and ruin Crowden's credibility.
What's the benefit of the affidavit?
The purpose of it would be that if Sinclair were ever charged, or if a grand jury were considering charging him, and if Crowden decided to cooperate, that anything Crowden would say in his testimony would basically contradict what he had said under oath in the affidavit. So you'd have two statements by Crowden under oath that contradicted each other and would essentially make him worthless as a witness.
And did Daryl Crowden realize that that's what this affidavit was doing to himself?
Well, he realized shortly after we started the conversation what Sinclair was trying to do. So he knew that by the time the meeting was over, that by executing that false affidavit, he had put himself in further jeopardy. And I also told him that DEA, Richard and Blitz, and I weren't going to rest until he was brought to justice. And that brought a few tears to his eyes, because I basically told him that we weren't going away.
Facing federal charges, Darryl Crowden agreed to cooperate with the investigation into Officer Eric Sinclair, but he had one stipulation.
He doesn't want to come anywhere near downtown because he's scared to death he would be seen coming or leaving that U.S. Attorney's office or the federal courthouse.
He was worried that Sinclair would do something to him.
Yeah. So Jim sets up a meeting with him and his lawyer.
We met at the Sea Turtle Inn out at the beach.
Hidden in a hotel room, miles away from any JSO badge, Clint and his team quickly understood why Crowden was so nervous. He knew what Officer Sinclair was capable of. Not only does he confirm the officer was selling police secrets to drug dealers, but Crowden also reveals the two worked together to steal cocaine from one of his drug suppliers during a bogus traffic stop a year earlier, and tells investigators Sinclair had sent Crowden and his brother Jeffrey Reed to break in and steal drugs and money from an apartment when Sinclair found out the man who lived there was being interviewed by DEA and would not be home. As if that was not bad enough, what Crowden told them next changed the trajectory of the entire investigation. Officer Eric Sinclair had recruited Crowden and his brother to rob a bank customer and had gotten away with it for more than a year.
Sinclair, in early May, told Crowden about a guy who goes to the bank where Sinclair, works off duty every Friday, like clockwork, picks up about $50,000 and to take back to the Jaguar Gas Mart, a convenience store located over near Talleyrand by the docks, because the convenience store would cash checks of the dock workers on Friday.
It was Sinclair's job to provide security to the customer, but instead, he was plotting 20-year-old Hassan Tahan's robbery.
All right, so Reed and Crowden were set up right here, facing the bank. Eric Sinclair exited the bank, and he walked over to the parking lot, and he tapped
Kind of like
on the car.
And what was the purpose of that?
That's to let Crowden and Reed know this is the car that the convenience store employee who will have the $50,000 will be driving. So now they know when the person who comes out of the bank goes to that car, that's the person that they're supposed to rob. Sinclair is communicating to Crowden by phone, describing what Hassan Tahan is doing. In other words, he's at the teller, he's got the money, we're coming out. So Sinclair comes out behind Hassan Tahan. Hassan Tahan walks toward the car, and Sinclair goes right back into the bank. So now it's Hassan Tahan by himself with the $50,000 walking to his car. And that's when Jeff Reed drives up, puts the car in, that he's driving in park, and he pulls out a gun, he points it at Hassan Tahan and says, "Give me your money." And he basically panics and throws the bag of cash into his car and runs. Jeff Reed gets in the car, grabs the money, and then gets in the car that he drove up there to the parking lot, and he takes off. In the meantime, Hassan Tahan is back in the bank. He says, "I've been robbed." Sinclair runs out with him, gets in his car, and he pretends to give chase.
Because Sinclair broke from routine, normally walks the bank customer to their car so they can get in, they're safe, they've got all that money, and drives away. Was there ever any question as to, from Tahan, where was Sinclair?
Well, absolutely. I mean, Hassan Tahan immediately was like, where was my security? Where were you? You always come out. But at that point in time, nothing came of that in terms of the bank, because Sinclair remained an off-duty security officer there.
John Zipperer, who was part of the federal task force investigating Sinclair, remembers the Tahan case. He was working in the robbery unit at the time.
We all interviewed everybody there. And at the time, it seemed like it was just a robbery. I mean, it was a bad neighborhood. The guy had a regular routine where he would go get the money out. So, there's any number of people that might have known that he was doing that on a regular basis. We went through the normal procedures. We had him down, we had him look at photographs. We interviewed him, we reviewed videotapes, the usual, and just came up empty-handed.
So, unsolved.
Unsolved.
Officer Eric Sinclair had pulled off the perfect robbery.
Nobody suspected that he was involved in anything. The people at the bank loved him to death, and so he just continued to work there.
How much money did everyone get?
I think it was $52,000. And in the end, Sinclair got $26,000, and Reed and Crowden each got $13,000.
Very surprised that it went from, the drugs and the money to all of a sudden to a bank robbery, robbing a customer coming out of the bank. And I think we were all shocked.
Did you ever not believe Crowden?
I can't remember a single lie that we caught him in terms of anything. Once he decided to cooperate, he was 100%. When he described what happened on May 15th and was talking about the telephone calls, those telephone calls happened just like he said they did. The number of calls, the timing of the calls, and they were from Sinclair's phone to his phone.
He never deviated.
The team started digging into Sinclair's life, his phone records, where he worked off duty, and they made a stunning discovery. Something else had happened at the same bank 6 weeks after Hassan Tahan was robbed. Only it didn't get a lot of attention because at that time, July 1998, Jacksonville was in the middle of a crisis. A wildfire was burning so intensely, the city was blanketed with smoke. Part of Interstate 95 had to shut down. Homes and businesses had been evacuated. It dominated local news headlines. So much so, there was only a short story in the newspaper and a brief mention during the evening news about a body that had been discovered in a wooded area on the north side of the city. It was a holiday weekend, July 4th. A man's shirtless body had been discovered by someone collecting cans to sell for scrap. His name was Sammy Safar. He had been reported missing the day before, Friday, July 3rd, last seen making a large withdrawal from the same bank where Hassan Tahan had been robbed May 15th. Safar's family had called 911 right away when he failed to show up at the convenience store he owned. They were already suspicious about trips to the bank. Why? Tahan and Safar are related. Safar is Tahan's uncle. And like his nephew, Safar had also withdrawn $50,000 as part of a check cashing service he offered to customers at his store. He started making the bank runs himself after his young nephew was robbed. His family discovered his green SUV abandoned in a parking lot not far from the bank. It was unlocked. His wallet and cash were sitting in plain sight. Officer Eric Sinclair was working security at the bank the same day Safar was last seen alive.
We didn't believe in coincidences. So once we were comfortable in our belief that Eric Sinclair was involved in the first robbery, we worked off of a hypothesis that he was involved in the second robbery.
While Darrell Crowden had already admitted that Sinclair had recruited him and his brother Jeffrey Reed to rob Tahan May 15th, he insisted he knew nothing about Sammy Safar's disappearance and death on July 3rd. But Crowden told investigators he suspected Officer Sinclair knew who was involved. Remembering a call he received from Sinclair the same day Safar was last seen at the bank, Sinclair had insisted they meet late that night at a truck stop in a remote area of the city.
or the substance of the conversation was that Sinclair advised Crowden that something else happened at the bank and that the police may be coming after him. But he didn't say what had happened specifically. He just said, you know, you and your brother need to look out, because now that there have been two things that have happened at the same bank in a short period of time, and I'm working off duty there, they may come after us. And so, you know, you need to tell your brother Jeff to lie low, you need to lie low, and we need to stick together.
Sinclair was nervous.
Sinclair was nervous, according to Crowden.
Yep.
And that's when we went into the undercover phase of using Crowden to secretly record conversations with Sinclair.
Sending Crowden in wearing a wire was risky. Sinclair was clearly already suspicious when he tricked Crowden into giving Jim Clint the false affidavit. The team was already wondering if Sinclair might be trying to clean up other loose ends. They discovered Crowden's brother, who committed the first robbery, had been murdered in broad daylight just 1 week after Sinclair had told Crowden at the truck stop that he and his brother needed to lay low and not attract any attention. Reed had not done as Sinclair asked. He used part of the Tahan robbery money to buy a bright yellow Mercedes, not exactly discreet. The team was considering the possibility Jeffrey Reed might be dead because he disobeyed Sinclair's order to lay low. There was also another problem that worried the team about Crowden's safety.
We had to cut out some of the people that were in the task force.
Why?
Information that we were getting that they might be leaking out information to.
They were starting to worry about who they could trust internally.
We became suspicious that at least two of the JSO officers who were involved in the investigation were passing along information that was getting back to our subjects.
What did you think of that?
I thought it was awful. I mean, that's why the night we sent Crowden into Sinclair, it was only the four of us out there. We just had to get this done. We had to get Crowden into Sinclair, because we knew if we didn't, the case was probably not going to go any further.
So they had Crowden set a meeting with Sinclair at his home and mic'd him up, hoping the officer would say something incriminating about Hassan Tahan's robbery or reveal more information about Sammy Safar's disappearance. That meeting is something these three have never forgotten, even 25 years later.
Once he went in the house, I distinctly remember moving a lot closer, because we knew that Sinclair would come out and look around when he got there, because he was paranoid at this point.
I thought we were going to lose our witness during the recording. His voice went up an octane. He was extremely nervous, which I think made us very nervous.
And once they were inside alone, something went wrong.
The transmitter stopped working. We were ready to get out of the car because he had been in there for some time.
So what was your worry?
We're worried that it was going to kill him.
Yeah.
That's what we were worried about. I mean, he was our star witness. He was our witness. And we were just about to get out of the car when the transmitter came back on.
Yeah, Sheila called and said, don't. And I mean, we were literally cracking the door on the car to go.
In the 20 years I worked at DEA, that was probably one of the scariest nights.
It wasn't necessarily that Sinclair admitted anything specifically, but what he did was he coached Crowden in terms of what to lie about, what to tell law enforcement, incriminating statements.
Sinclair had been careful not to talk about what happened to Sammy Safar, but investigators had picked up on two critical pieces of information Sinclair had given to Darryl Crowden. First, during that late-night meeting at the truck stop on July 3rd, Crowden said Sinclair told him other police might be involved in what happened at the bank that day, the same day Safar disappeared. And second, Crowden had also told investigators about 2 police officers who had pulled him over, searched his car, and then just let him go months earlier. Sinclair had referred to the officers as his police buddies and told Crowden one of them was named Carl. Investigators were beginning to think Carl could be the one who had worked with Sinclair to target Sammy Safar at the bank and then kill him for his money. During our next episode, trying to solve this man's murder with no physical evidence.
But there was no indication of ligature marks. There was no stab wound, no gunshot wound, no contusion that would have caused death.
The only real chance they thought they might have to find out who else was involved was at best a shot in the dark. That somehow worked.
It was a big break in the case. I said, Carl, you've just confessed. He said, prove it. And I said, well, that's just what we're going to do. We're going to prove it.
Florida Justice Betraying the Badge continues.